A desperate widow with 3 starving children knocked on the door of the most dangerous man in Colorado territory, a rancher so broken by betrayal that he'd sworn never to let another soul into his house. She had 24 hours before the bank seized her wagon, no money for food, and winter storms closing in fast. He had a dying ranch, an empty kitchen, and a heart buried so deep under rage that everyone said it was already dead. What happened next would either save them all or destroy what little they had left. Stay until the end to find out if love can survive when trust is already dead. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The notice had been nailed to the trading post wall for 3 weeks, and Wade Holloway was starting to think it would rot there. Cook wanted. Room and meals provided. Must tolerate silence. Short, blunt, exactly like the man who'd written it. Wade stood in the doorway of Mackey's General Store, watching the October wind tear at the paper's edges. 21 days since he'd hammered it up there with hands that still knew how to swing a hammer but had forgotten how to shake another man's hand in greeting. 21 days of watching drifters and ranch hands walk past it like it carried plague. Maybe it did. Still no takers? Samuel Mackey asked from behind the counter, not bothering to hide the pity in his voice. Wade turned slowly. 43 years old, 6'2", shoulders broad enough to carry fence posts for miles, but something in his eyes made people look away quick. Not meanness exactly. Something colder. Something that suggested the person inside had left a long time ago, and what remained was just going through motions. Don't need your commentary, Sam. Wasn't offering any. Mackey wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better decades. Just saying, might help if you smiled once in a while, or wrote something more inviting. Must tolerate silence sounds like a prison sentence. It is what it is. That's exactly the problem, Wade. Wade grabbed the flour and coffee beans he'd come for, dropped coins on the counter without counting them, and walked out. Behind him, he heard Mackey sigh. That specific sound people made when they'd given up trying to reach someone who didn't want reaching. The ride back to the ranch took 40 minutes through country that had once felt like freedom and now felt like purgatory. Brown grass stretched toward mountains that were already snow-capped even though winter hadn't officially arrived. His cattle, what remained of them, dotted the hills like scattered teeth in a dying mouth. 60 head where there used to be 300. The market had crashed. Disease had taken 20 in the spring. And Wade had stopped caring enough to fight for the rest. The house appeared over the rise like an accusation. 2 stories of weathered wood and broken shutters. The porch sagged on the left side where Wade had never bothered fixing it after the support beam cracked 2 winters ago. Windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since... He cut that thought off before it finished. Since Margaret left. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago, but who was counting? Wade dismounted, led his horse to the barn, and went through the mechanical ritual of unsaddling, brushing, feeding. The barn cat, a scarred Tom he'd never named, watched from the loft with yellow eyes that held the same judgment as Mackey's sigh. "Yeah, I know," Wade muttered. "I'm a miserable bastard. Newsflash." The cat didn't respond. Inside the house, silence hit like a physical weight. The kitchen table held the remains of this morning's breakfast, hardtack and jerky because Wade couldn't cook worth a damn, and had stopped pretending to try. The stove was cold. The floor was dirty. Dishes were piled in the basin, and Wade knew he wouldn't wash them tonight either. He dropped the supplies on the counter and stood there, staring at nothing. This was his life now. This was what it had become. Margaret had tried. He'd give her that much. For 7 years, she'd tried to make this place a home, tried to fill it with warmth and conversation and all the things women were supposed to bring to frontier marriages. But Wade had been raised by a father who believed emotions were weakness and silence was strength, and he'd carried those lessons into his marriage like stones in his pockets. She'd begged him to talk to her, to share something, anything. He told her there was nothing to share. She'd cried. He told her to stop crying. She'd left on a Tuesday morning while he was checking the north fence line. No note, no goodbye. Just an empty closet and a bed that suddenly felt enormous. The lawyer's letter came 2 weeks later. Abandonment. Legal separation. She was somewhere in California now, or so he'd heard. Married to a shopkeeper in Sacramento. Probably laughing over dinner, probably forgetting she'd ever wasted 7 years in Colorado with a man who'd had nothing to give her except cold shoulders and colder silences. Wade poured himself whiskey from the bottle he kept over the sink, drank it standing up, staring out the window at his dying ranch. The notice wasn't working. He'd known it wouldn't. Who the hell wanted to work for a man whose own wife couldn't stand to stay? He was pouring a second glass when he heard the wagon. At first he thought he'd imagined it. Visitors were rare, and nobody came out this far without good reason. But then he heard it again, the unmistakable creak of wheels, the plod of exhausted horses. Wade stepped onto the porch, whiskey still in hand. Coming up the long drive was the sorriest excuse for a wagon he'd ever seen. One wheel was wobbling, like it might fall off any second. The canvas cover was torn and flapping. The 2 horses pulling it looked ready to drop dead from exhaustion, and sitting on the driver's bench was a woman. Wade's first instinct was to go back inside and pretend he hadn't seen anything. His second was to reach for the rifle he kept by the door, because strangers meant trouble, and trouble was something he'd had enough of. But something kept him standing there. The wagon lurched to a stop 20 feet from the porch. The woman set the brake with practiced efficiency, then climbed down with movements that were careful but not weak. She was maybe 30, maybe older, hard to tell with frontier women who'd been worn down by sun and hardship. Dark hair pulled back in a bun that was trying to escape. Dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. But it was her eyes that caught Wade's attention. Not soft, not pleading, just steady. "Are you Wade Holloway?" she called out. Wade didn't answer immediately. Behind her in the wagon, he could see movement. Small shapes. Children. "Who's asking?" he finally said. "Clara Bennett." She moved closer, stopping at the base of the porch steps. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her hands were clasped together to keep them from shaking. But her voice didn't shake. "I'm here about the cook position." Wade almost laughed. Almost. "Position's been filled." "No, it hasn't. I was at Mackey's store an hour ago. The notice is still up." "That's because nobody wants it." "I want it." Wade took a drink of whiskey, using the pause to study her. She was bone thin, probably hadn't eaten properly in weeks. Her dress was clean but threadbare. The wagon behind her was packed with everything she owned, which didn't look like much, and there were definitely children in there. "How many?" he asked. Clara's jaw tightened. "How many what?" "Kids? How many you got hiding in that wagon?" For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not shame, but something close to defiance. "3. "Jesus Christ." "Mr. Holloway." "No." Wade shook his head, already turning back toward the door. "I need a cook, not a nursery. Notice didn't say anything about children. Notice didn't say no children either." He stopped, turned back around. "You seriously expect me to take on a woman and 3 kids? On a failing ranch? In the middle of nowhere? I expect you to honor your word." Clara climbed one step, then another, until she was almost level with him on the porch, close enough that he could see the desperation she was working so hard to hide. The notice said room and meals provided. "I can cook better than anyone in this territory. I can clean, I can mend. I can do accounts if you need it. All I'm asking is a chance. With 3 kids. They come with me. We're a package. You don't want all of us, you don't get any of us." Wade stared at her. The audacity of it was almost impressive. She was standing on his porch, in clothes that barely counted as clothes, driving a wagon that should have been abandoned miles ago, making demands like she had any leverage whatsoever. "Where's your husband?" he asked. Something crossed her face then. Pain, quickly buried. "Dead. Mining accident, 14 months ago." "Family?" "Had some in Missouri. They made it clear we weren't welcome after Thomas died." "So you've been wandering around Colorado for over a year with 3 kids and no money?" "We've been surviving." "Doesn't look like it." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Mr. Holloway, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to offer services in exchange for shelter. If you're not interested, just say so and we'll move on." "Move on to where?" "That's not your concern." Wade looked past her at the wagon. One of the children, a boy, maybe 8 or 9, was watching through a gap in the canvas. Their eyes met, and the kid didn't look away, just stared with the kind of serious expression that children shouldn't have to wear. "They eat much?" Wade heard himself ask. Clara blinked. What? The kids. They eat much? They eat what they're given, and they're grateful for it. Wade took another drink. The whiskey was cheap and burned going down, which was exactly what he deserved. He should say no. Should send this woman and her children back down the drive and out of his life before they became another failure he'd have to carry. But then Clara said something that changed everything. I can bake bread. Wade looked at her. What? Bread. Real bread. Not hardtack. Not the dense blocks they sell at Mackey's store. Actual soft, warm bread that makes the whole house smell like... She paused, searching for the word. Like home. Wade hadn't tasted real bread in 3 years. Not since Margaret left. He'd forgotten what it was like to have something that wasn't either burned or hard enough to break teeth. You're serious? I learned from my grandmother, who learned from hers. I can make sourdough, wheat bread, rye, cornbread, biscuits that melt in your mouth. I can make bread out of damn near nothing when supplies run low, and I can do it consistently day after day without complaint. Wade looked at the whiskey in his glass, looked at the dying ranch beyond, looked at this stubborn woman who was offering him something he'd stopped believing existed. He should say no. He was going to say no. 2-week trial. He heard himself say instead. You cook, you clean, you stay out of my way. Kids stay out of my way too. They cause trouble, you're all gone. You can't cook like you claim, you're gone. Deal? Clara's shoulders dropped half an inch, relief she was trying to hide. Deal. Barn's got a spare room above the hayloft. Hasn't been used in years, but it's got a roof and walls. You can stay there. The house has... Barn, Wade said firmly. You're not staying in the house. Clara's mouth tightened, but she nodded. Fine. Barn. Wade gestured toward the wagon. Get your things settled. Dinner's in an hour. I'll expect something better than what I've been eating. You will. She walked back to the wagon with her spine straight and her chin up, and Wade watched her go with the uncomfortable feeling that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his life. Probably worst. Definitely worst. He finished the whiskey and went inside, leaving the door open behind him for the first time in months. Clara climbed into the wagon and found 3 pairs of eyes staring at her. Well? Eli asked. He was 9 years old and had been the man of the family since his father died, which was a responsibility no 9-year-old should carry, but here they were. We're staying, Clara said, reaching for their bags. At least for 2 weeks. He looks mean, 7-year-old Rose whispered. She was holding her cloth doll so tight her knuckles were white. He looks sad, Clara corrected. There's a difference. Where do we sleep? Eli asked, ever practical. Barn. Eli's face fell. The barn? Mama, we can't. We can, and we will. Clara grabbed the largest bag and handed it to him. It's shelter, Eli. It's warm. It's safe. Right now, that's all we need. 4-year-old Tommy tugged on her skirt. I'm hungry, Mama. I know, sweetheart. I'm going to cook us something good tonight. Something with vegetables and meat and bread. Real bread. Promise? Clara bent down and kissed the top of his head. His hair smelled like road dust and dried sweat, and her heart cracked a little. Promise. They unloaded what little they had. 3 bags of clothes, a box of kitchen supplies. Clara had managed to keep through everything. A few books Rose refused to abandon, and Tommy's wooden horse named General. The barn was exactly as advertised, old, dusty, and smelling strongly of hay and horse. But there was a room, small, cramped, a single window with cracked glass, but 4 walls and a floor that was mostly solid. I've seen worse, Eli said, which was true and also heartbreaking. Clara set down her bag and looked at her children. 3 faces staring back at her with a mixture of exhaustion, hope, and fear. They'd been on the road for 6 weeks, turned away from 5 different towns because nobody wanted to hire a widow with children. They'd slept in the wagon, eaten scraps, survived on stubbornness, and the last of their savings. This was their last chance. She knelt down and pulled all 3 of them close. Listen to me. This man, Mr. Holloway, he's not a kind man. He's not going to be nice to us, but he's giving us a chance, and we are not going to waste it. Understood? Yes, Mama, they chorused. Eli, you help me with whatever I need. Rose, you watch Tommy and keep him quiet. Tommy, You stay close to your sister and you don't touch anything that's not ours. We make ourselves useful. We make ourselves invisible. And we do not give him any reason to send us away. Eli's jaw set in that way that reminded Clara so painfully of Thomas. What if he's mean to you? Then I'll handle it. Mama? I'll handle it, Clara repeated firmly. Your job is to be children, not protectors. My job is to keep us together. Deal? Eli didn't look happy, but he nodded. Clara stood up and smoothed down her dress. Right. I'm going to the house to start dinner. You three stay here, get settled, and do not leave this barn unless I come get you. Clear? Clear, Rose said. Clara picked up her kitchen box and walked across the yard to the main house. The door was still open. She paused on the threshold, knocked twice on the frame, and waited. No answer. She knocked again. Mr. Holloway, I'm coming in to start dinner. Still nothing. Clara stepped inside and immediately understood why the man needed a cook. The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty dishes everywhere, food scraps on the counter. The floor looked like it hadn't been swept in weeks. The stove was cold and covered in grease. But underneath the mess, she could see what this place used to be. Good bones, solid construction, a big kitchen table that could seat 8, windows that would let in beautiful light if someone cleaned them, cupboards that were well built even if they were currently empty, a house that used to be a home. Clara set down her box and rolled up her sleeves. First things first, get the stove going. She found wood stacked haphazardly by the back door, kindling that was dry enough to use. Within 10 minutes, she had a fire burning hot and steady. While the stove heated, she tackled the dishes, pumping water from the sink and scrubbing away weeks of neglect. Then she took inventory of what food was available. Not much. Dried beans. Some sad-looking potatoes. Jerky that was more leather than meat. Flour that had probably been here since the previous cook. Coffee. Salt. And she almost laughed. A jar of sourdough starter sitting in the back of a cupboard, crusty and neglected, but potentially still alive. It was enough. Barely, but enough. Clara soaked the beans, diced the potatoes, and started a stew with what little meat she could salvage. While that simmered, she mixed flour and water with some of the starter, working the dough with hands that knew this rhythm by heart. Her grandmother had taught her when she was 6 years old. Bread is love in edible form. You put your heart into it, and people taste the difference. She shaped the dough, let it rise by the warm stove, and turned her attention to cleaning. An hour later, the kitchen was transformed. Dishes clean and stacked. Floor swept. Counter wiped down. Windows opened to let fresh air chase out the smell of neglect. The stew was bubbling nicely, and the bread was in the oven, filling the house with a smell that Clara knew from experience could make even the hardest man's defenses crack. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Wade Holloway appeared in the doorway, stopped, and stared. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and met his gaze. Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. I wasn't sure where you wanted to eat, the dining room or... What the hell did you do? His voice was rough, accusatory. Clara's spine straightened. I cleaned. That was part of the agreement. I didn't tell you to, He gestured vaguely at the kitchen. This. You hired me to cook and clean. I'm doing both. Wade walked slowly into the room, looking around like he'd stepped into someone else's house. He touched the counter, clean for the first time in years, and pulled his hand back like it had burned him. The bread, he said quietly. Is that fresh? Yes, it'll be ready with the stew. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there in the middle of his own kitchen, looking completely lost. Clara turned back to the stove, giving him space. I set a place at the table for you, unless you prefer to eat elsewhere. Where are the kids? In the barn. I told them to stay there. They eat too. Clara turned around, surprised. I plan to bring them portions after you. This table seats 8, Wade interrupted. He was still looking around like the room might disappear if he blinked. Waste of space to eat alone. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. You want them to eat with us? Didn't say that. Said the table seats 8. He moved toward the door, paused. Tell them dinner's in 15 minutes. They show up clean and quiet, or they don't show up at all. He was gone before Clara could respond. She stood there for a moment, processing. Then she picked up her skirts and ran to the barn. Eli scrubbed Tommy's face with a wet cloth while Rose tried to tame her wild hair. Are we really eating in the house? Rose whispered, half excited and half terrified. That's what Mama said, Eli confirmed. He looked at Clara. Is he going to yell at us? Not if you're quiet and polite. What if Tommy drops something? Tommy's face crumpled. I won't drop nothing. Anything, Clara corrected gently. And you won't, because you're going to be very careful, all of you. She knelt down to their level. This is important. First impressions matter. We need him to see that you're good children who won't cause trouble. Can you do that? 3 solemn nods. Good. Let's go. They walked across the yard like they were approaching a gallows. The house loomed larger than it should, warm light spilling from the windows that Clara had just cleaned. It looked almost welcoming. Almost. Clara led them inside. Wade was already sitting at the head of the table, a position that made it clear this was his house and they were guests. Temporary ones. Kids, he said by way of greeting. Not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledgement. This is Eli, Rose, and Tommy, Clara said, ushering them to seats. Children, thank Mr. Holloway for allowing us to eat at his table. Thank you, Mr. Holloway, they chorused, voices small. Wade grunted. Clara decided to take that as acceptance. She served the stew in bowls that she'd found in the cupboard and washed. It wasn't much. The meat was sparse and the potatoes were probably a week past their prime, but it was hot and it was real food. She pulled the bread from the oven, the crust golden and crackling, and set it on the table with butter she'd found in the cold box. Wade stared at the bread like it was a ghost. Clara cut thick slices and passed them around. Tommy reached for his immediately, but Eli caught his hand with a sharp look. They all waited, watching Wade. He picked up his slice slowly, tore off a piece, brought it to his mouth. Clara watched his eyes close as he chewed. When he opened them again, something had shifted. The hard edges weren't gone, but they'd softened, just a fraction. Good, he said quietly. It's good. Rose smiled. Tommy wiggled in his seat. Eli relaxed slightly. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people too hungry and too tired for conversation. Tommy fell asleep halfway through his second slice of bread, head drooping onto the table. Rose finished everything on her plate and then sat primly with her hands folded. Eli ate methodically, watching Wade with eyes that were too adult for a 9-year-old. Wade cleaned his bowl twice, took 3 pieces of bread, and didn't say a word. When the meal was finished, Clara stood to clear the dishes. Leave them, Wade said. It's no trouble. Leave them. He pushed back from the table. You cooked. That's enough for tonight. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Come on, children. Time for bed. She herded them toward the door, but Wade's voice stopped her. Mrs. Bennett? She turned. Yes? He was standing by the window, looking out at the dark ranch, not looking at her. The bread, he said. Tomorrow morning. Can you make it again? Clara allowed herself a small smile. Every day if you want it. He nodded once. 2-week trial, starting tomorrow. Starting tomorrow, Clara agreed. She took her children back to the barn, tucked them into the makeshift beds she'd constructed from their bags and old blankets, and listened to them fall asleep with full stomachs for the first time in weeks. Through the barn window, she could see the lights of the main house. One window glowed warmer than the others. The kitchen. She imagined Wade Holloway standing there, alone again, maybe thinking about the meal he'd just eaten, the bread that tasted like something he'd lost. Clara pulled her own blanket around her shoulders and made a promise to herself and to her sleeping children. 2 weeks would become permanent. She'd make damn sure of it, because she'd seen something in that broken man's eyes when he tasted her bread. Something that suggested the person everyone thought was dead might still be alive. Just buried. And Clara Bennett had survived a mining collapse, abandonment by family, months on the road with 3 children and no money. She'd learned that buried things could be excavated, even hearts, especially hearts. Outside, the Colorado night pressed against the barn walls, cold and unforgiving. But inside, for the first time in over a year, Clara and her children slept without fear of tomorrow. Because tomorrow, they had a place to be, a table to sit at, and bread to bake. The first week felt like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Clara woke before dawn every morning, the barn still dark and cold, her breath visible in the air. She'd dress quietly so as not to wake the children, then cross the yard to the main house where she'd restart the fire and begin the daily ritual of bread. Knead the dough. Let it rise. Bake it until the whole kitchen smelled like the home this place used to be. Wade never commented on finding her there when he came down. Just poured himself coffee and went out to work the ranch, leaving Clara to transform his disaster of a kitchen into something functional. By the third day, she'd reorganized the entire pantry. By the fifth, she'd scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. By the seventh, she'd opened every window in the house despite the autumn chill, chasing out years of stale air and replacing it with something that felt almost alive. The children learned quickly to make themselves invisible. Eli helped Clara in the mornings, hauling water and chopping vegetables with a serious concentration that made her chest ache. Rose kept Tommy occupied in the barn, reading to him from their small collection of books until the words blurred together. They came to the house only for meals, ate quickly and quietly, then disappeared back to their room like ghosts. Wade didn't speak to them, barely looked at them. Just sat at the head of the table, ate whatever Clara prepared, and left without a word. But he was eating. That was something. On the 8th day, everything changed. Clara was in the kitchen making stew when she heard a crash from outside, followed by cursing that would have made a sailor blush. She ran to the window and saw Wade on the ground near the barn, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. The ladder he'd been using to fix the barn roof lay beside him in pieces. She didn't think, just ran. "Don't touch me," Wade growled when she reached him. His face was white with pain, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "Your leg. I said don't touch me." Clara ignored him, kneeling in the dirt to examine the damage. Not broken, thank every star in the sky, but badly twisted, already swelling. He'd be useless for days, maybe weeks. "Can you stand?" she asked. "Of course I can stand. I'm not—" He tried to push himself up and went even whiter, sucking air through his teeth. "Stop being stubborn and let me help you." "I don't need—" "Mr. Holloway." Clara's voice went sharp, the tone she used when her children were about to do something catastrophically stupid. "You can either let me help you into the house, or you can sit in this dirt until pride kills you. Choose." Wade stared at her. For a moment she thought he might actually choose the dirt. Then he reached out his hand. Clara braced herself and pulled. Wade was a big man, solid muscle and stubborn pride, and getting him upright was like trying to move a boulder. He leaned heavily on her, breathing hard, and together they limped toward the house. "Eli!" Clara called. "Eli, I need you." Her son appeared from the barn, took one look at the situation, and ran over. Between the two of them, they managed to get Wade up the porch steps and into the kitchen. He collapsed into a chair with a sound that was half groan, half curse. "Get his boot off," Clara told Eli. "Carefully." Wade grabbed her wrist. "The hell you are." "Your ankle is swelling. If we don't get that boot off now, we'll have to cut it off later." "Nobody's cutting my boots." "Then let us remove it now." They stared at each other. Wade's eyes were dark with pain and something else, fear maybe, or the humiliation of needing help from a woman and a 9-year-old boy. Finally, he let go of her wrist. Eli worked the boot off with gentle efficiency that surprised Clara. Where had her son learned to be so careful with injured things? Wade hissed when the boot came free, and Clara saw his ankle, swollen, already turning purple, but definitely not broken. "I need cold water and clean cloths," she told Eli, "and the whiskey from above the sink." While Eli gathered supplies, Clara pulled up a second chair and propped Wade's leg on it. He didn't fight her this time, just sat there looking like a trapped animal trying to decide whether to bite or flee. "This is going to hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over the ankle. Wade's knuckles went white on the chair arms, but he didn't make a sound. Clara wrapped the ankle in cold compresses, working with hands that had tended plenty of injuries over the years. Mining camps bred broken bones and torn flesh like crops, and she'd learned early that squeamishness was a luxury frontier women couldn't afford. "You'll need to stay off it for at least a week," she said, securing the bandage. "Maybe 2. I've got cattle to move, fences to mend. Winter's coming, and you'll do none of it if you tear this ankle worse trying to be heroic." Clara sat back on her heels. "You have 2 choices. Rest and heal, or push through and end up crippled. I've seen men make the second choice. It never ends well." Wade's jaw worked. "The ranch, I'll handle it." Both Wade and Eli stared at her. "You," Wade said slowly, "are going to handle my ranch. I grew up on a ranch. Bigger than this one, actually, before my father drank it away. I can mend fences. I can move cattle. I can keep things running for 2 weeks. You're a woman. Clara smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I'm a woman who's kept 3 children alive through situations that would have broken most men. Your cattle won't be a problem. Wade looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. The boy helps, he said finally. Eli? He's got sense. More than some men I've hired. Wade shifted in his chair, wincing. He helps you, and I'll tell you what needs doing. Deal? Clara glanced at Eli, who was standing straighter than she'd ever seen him, pride and fear warring on his young face. Deal, she said. That afternoon, Clara learned exactly how bad things were. Wade gave instructions from his chair while she and Eli walked the property. The fences were a disaster, posts rotting, wire sagging, entire sections that had been patched so many times they were more repair than original. The cattle were scattered across 3 different pastures, lean and underfed because Wade had stopped driving them to better grazing months ago. The barn needed work. The equipment needed work. Everything needed work. He's been letting it die, Eli said quietly as they stood on a ridge overlooking the ranch. Hasn't he? Clara didn't answer right away. Below them, the Holloway Ranch spread out like a broken promise, all that potential buried under neglect and grief. Yes, she finally admitted. He has. Are we going to fix it? We're going to try. They started with the fences. Clara taught Eli how to sink new posts, how to string wire tight enough to hold, but not so tight it would snap in winter. They worked until her hands blistered and Eli's arms shook with exhaustion, then worked some more. Rose watched Tommy during the days, keeping him entertained with stories and games. At night, she helped Clara prepare dinner while firing questions faster than bullets. Why is Mr. Holloway so mean? He's not mean. He's hurt. What hurt him? Life, sweetheart. Life hurts everyone eventually. Will he hurt us? Clara paused, knife halfway through an onion. No, I don't think he will. How do you know? Because hurt people recognize other hurt people, and they usually don't make it worse. Rose considered this with the seriousness of a 7-year-old philosopher. Mama? Yes? I think he's sad about his wife leaving. Clara looked at her daughter. How do you know about that? I heard Mr. Mackey talking when we were at the store. He said Mr. Holloway drove away the only good thing he had, and now he's just waiting to die. Rose Bennett, you shouldn't eavesdrop. I wasn't trying to. People just talk loud. Rose picked up a carrot and started peeling it with exaggerated care. Is that true? Is he waiting to die? Clara thought about Wade sitting in his kitchen, staring at bread like it was a memory he couldn't quite reach. Thought about the way he'd let his ranch fall apart, the way he'd withdrawn so far into silence that even basic kindness seemed to hurt him. Maybe he was, Clara said softly. But maybe we can change his mind. The second week brought the first real test. 3 of Wade's cattle got through a broken fence section and wandered onto neighboring property. The neighbor, a man named Garrett, who Clara had never met, showed up at the ranch furious and demanding compensation. Where's Holloway? He shouted from his horse. Clara stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. Mr. Holloway is injured. I'm handling ranch business until he recovers. Garrett looked her up and down with open contempt. You're the cook. I'm Mrs. Bennett, and those cattle will be back on Holloway property by sunset. Damn right they will, along with $20 for the hay they ate and the fence they damaged. We'll pay for actual damages, not inflated ones. Garrett's face went red. You calling me a liar? I'm saying I'll inspect the damage myself before any money changes hands. That's just good business. Behind her, Clara heard the kitchen door open. Wade appeared, moving on a makeshift crutch Eli had fashioned from an old fence post. His face was pale but set in hard lines. Garrett, he said quietly. Wade, your woman here is... Mrs. Bennett speaks for the ranch while I'm laid up. You got a problem with that, you got a problem with me. The air went very still. Garrett stared at Wade, then at Clara, then back at Wade. Whatever he saw in Wade's eyes made him change tactics. Look, I don't want trouble. Just want fair compensation for damages. And you'll get it, Clara said, after I inspect the fence and count the cattle. Tomorrow morning, first light. That acceptable? Garrett clearly wanted to argue, but Wade was still standing there, balanced on his makeshift crutch, looking like he might fall over or commit violence, possibly both, and that seemed to settle the matter. First light, Garrett agreed. He rode off without another word. Clara waited until he was gone before turning to Wade. You should be sitting down. You should have called me sooner. I had it handled. Wade stopped himself, glancing toward the barn where Rose and Tommy were watching. He's difficult, and he doesn't like dealing with women. Then he'll have to learn. Clara held the door open. Inside, before you fall and do more damage. Wade limped back to his chair, his face tight with pain and frustration. Clara fetched him water and fresh bandages, redressing the ankle that was finally starting to look less like an eggplant. You can't take on Garrett alone, Wade said. I won't be alone. Eli's coming with me. He's 9. He's smart and he knows cattle. That's more than Garrett thinks I have. Clara finished the bandage and stood. Besides, you taught me something this week. What's that? That scared men respect stubbornness more than kindness. Wade almost smiled. Almost. Where'd you learn that? Watching you. She left him sitting there and went back to the kitchen, where bread dough was waiting to be shaped. Through the window, she could see Eli fixing another fence section, his small frame bent over work that should have belonged to a grown man. Her children were growing up too fast, learning lessons they shouldn't need yet, but they were surviving. That's what mattered. That's what always mattered. The inspection went exactly as Clara expected. Garrett tried to claim 6 cattle had broken through when it was actually 3. Tried to say they'd destroyed 50 feet of fence when the actual damage was maybe 15. Tried to inflate the hay consumption to ridiculous levels. Clara walked the fence line with Eli beside her, making notes in a small book she'd found in Wade's office. She counted hoof prints, measured damage, did calculations in her head that made Garrett increasingly nervous. Final offer, she said when they were done. $8 for fence repair and hay, and we'll move our cattle back today. No charge for your time. That's insulting. I said 20. $8 is generous considering your fence was already half rotted before our cattle touched it. I'd be within my rights to claim you're partially responsible for the break. Garrett's eyes narrowed. You accusing me of poor maintenance? I'm observing facts. Take the $8 or we can involve the territorial magistrate and let him sort it out. Your choice. They both knew the magistrate would side with her. Garrett could posture all he wanted, but the evidence was clear. $8, he finally growled. And you keep your animals off my land. Gladly. Clara paid him from the small cash box Wade had grudgingly given her access to. Then she and Eli spent the afternoon rounding up the wayward cattle and repairing the fence section with proper posts and wire. When they got back to the ranch, Wade was on the porch waiting. Well? He asked. $8 plus repairs done. Clara dismounted, every muscle in her body screaming. Cattle are back. Fence is stronger than it was. Garrett won't bother you again. Wade studied her face. How'd you get him down from 20? Called his bluff. He was inflating damages, hoping you'd be too injured or too proud to check. And if he'd refused? Then I'd have taken it to the magistrate. But I knew he wouldn't. Clara handed the reins to Eli. Men like Garrett are bullies. They fold when you stand firm. You've dealt with men like Garrett before. It wasn't a question. Yes, Clara said simply. Unfortunately. She walked past him into the house, leaving Wade on the porch with an expression she couldn't quite read. That night at dinner, something shifted. Wade actually looked at the children when they sat down, really looked, like he was seeing individuals instead of obstacles. You did good work today, he said to Eli. Eli's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Sir? The fence repair. Solid work. Better than some men I've hired. Eli's face went red with pride. Thank you, sir. Wade turned to Rose, who was carefully cutting Tommy's meat into smaller pieces. You know your numbers? Rose blinked. Yes, sir. Mama taught me. Can you do accounts, addition, subtraction? And some multiplication. I'm not fast at division yet, but I'm learning. Wade grunted, something that might have been approval. Might have work for you. Ranch books are a mess. Rose sat up straighter. I could help with that. We'll see. Then Wade did something that shocked everyone. He looked at Tommy, who was clutching his wooden horse and trying very hard to be invisible. What's the horse's name? Wade asked. Tommy's eyes went wide. He glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragement. General Tommy whispered. Why General? 'Cause he's brave, like the generals in Mama's stories. Wade held out his hand. Can I see him? The table went silent. Tommy looked at the wooden horse, then at Wade's outstretched hand, then at his mother. This was his most precious possession, the one thing he never let anyone else touch. Slowly, carefully, Tommy placed General in Wade's palm. Wade examined the horse with the seriousness of a man evaluating fine craftsmanship, turned it over, ran his thumb along the carved mane, tested the wheels that let it roll across surfaces. Good horse, he said finally, handing it back. Takes care of him well. Tommy clutched General to his chest, beaming like Wade had just given him the world. Clara felt something crack in her chest, something that had been frozen solid since Thomas died, since her family turned them away, since she'd loaded 3 children into a dying wagon and set out with nothing except desperation and hope. Wade Holloway was thawing, slowly, reluctantly, like ice that didn't want to melt but couldn't help it when spring arrived. And she'd brought spring to his winter ranch. The 2-week trial ended on a Saturday. Clara knew because she'd been counting days like a prisoner counting down a sentence. 14 days. 14 chances to prove they belonged here. 14 opportunities to show Wade Holloway that a house full of people was better than a tomb full of silence. She made her best bread that morning, used the last of their honey to glaze the top, let it bake until the crust was perfect and the inside was soft enough to melt on your tongue. When Wade came down for breakfast, she had the bread waiting along with eggs, bacon, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. He sat down, ate in silence, finished everything on his plate. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at his ranch for a long time. Clara waited, her heart hammering so hard she thought he might hear it. The trial's over, Wade said finally. Yes, you've done everything you promised. The cooking, the cleaning, the ranch work. He turned to face her. More than I expected, actually. Thank you. The kids... He paused, searching for words. They haven't been trouble. They're good children. Yeah. Wade rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I'm not good with words. Never have been. But what I'm trying to say is, we're leaving. Wade's head snapped up. What? Clara kept her voice steady even though her whole world was tilting. The trial is over. You said 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks. We'll pack our things and be gone by noon. I didn't say... You don't have to say it. I can read between the lines, Mr. Holloway. Clara untied her apron with shaking hands. You're a man who values his solitude. We've disrupted that enough. We'll find somewhere else. Where? That's not your concern. The hell it isn't. Wade crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, his ankle be damned. You can't just load those kids into that death trap wagon and wander around Colorado hoping for charity. We've survived this long. Barely. Wade's voice was rough. I've seen that wagon, Mrs. Bennett. It won't make it another 50 miles, and winter's coming. You'll freeze before you reach the next town. Then what do you suggest? Clara's composure finally cracked. You want us gone, but you don't want us to leave? You can't have it both ways. Either we stay or we go, but I need to know which because my children deserve stability, and I can't keep... Stay. Clara stopped mid-sentence. Wade took a breath. I'm asking you to stay. Permanent. Not a trial. Not temporary. Stay. Why? Because this house hasn't felt like a house in 3 years. Because you brought it back to life. Because your boy works harder than men twice his age, and your girl is sharp enough to run accounts better than I ever could, and your littlest one makes me remember that good things can still exist. Wade's hands clenched into fists. Because I'm tired of eating alone. Tired of waking up alone. Tired of this place feeling like a grave I'm just waiting to lie down in. Clara stared at him. I can't pay much, Wade continued. Ranch is barely profitable, but you'll have shelter, food, safety, and the kids can stay. All of them. For as long as you want. As your cook. As whatever you want to be. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meanings neither of them was ready to name. I need to think about it, Clara said. Take your time. She walked out of the kitchen, across the yard, into the barn where her children were waiting with bags already packed because she'd warned them this might happen. Well? Eli asked. Clara sat down on a hay bale and put her face in her hands. Mama? Rose's voice was small, scared. Do we have to leave? He asked us to stay. Then why do you look sad? Because... Clara lifted her head. Because staying means something different now. It means this is our home. It means we're choosing to build a life here, and I need to know if that's what you want. I want to stay, Eli said immediately. I like the work. I like learning about ranching, and Mr. Holloway, he's not so bad once you get past the grouchy. I want to stay too, Rose said. I could help with the books, make everything organized, and Tommy likes it here. Tommy nodded vigorously, hugging General. General wants to stay. Clara looked at her 3 children, her reasons for breathing, for fighting, for surviving every impossible thing the world had thrown at them. Then we stay, she said, but we do it right. No more walking on eggshells. No more hiding in the barn. This becomes our home, truly. Agreed? Agreed, they chorused. Clara stood up, smoothed down her dress, and walked back to the main house. Wade was still in this kitchen, sitting at the table with his head in his hands, looking like a man who'd just gambled everything on a single bet and wasn't sure if he'd won or lost. We'll stay, Clara said from the doorway. Wade's head came up. On conditions, Clara continued, the children don't live in the barn anymore. There are 4 empty bedrooms upstairs. We use them. Done. Rose helps with the ranch accounts. Eli continues learning ranch work. Tommy gets to be a 4-year-old without anyone making him feel like a burden. Done. And you stop treating this house like a mausoleum. We open windows. We have conversations. We make this a home again. Wade stood up slowly. Anything else? Yes. Clara met his eyes. You tell me the truth. Why did you really ask us to stay? Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because I forgot what it was like to matter to anyone. And your kids look at me like I'm someone worth listening to. And you... He stopped, searching for words. You make me want to be better than the man I've been. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. That's enough, she said softly. That's more than enough. They stood there in the kitchen that Clara had brought back to life. 2 broken people who'd found each other because a notice on a wall mentioned bread and silence, and agreed to build something neither of them had dared hope for. A future. Outside, autumn was surrendering to winter. The first snow would come soon, and with it the brutal Colorado cold that killed cattle and broke spirits. But inside the Holloway ranch house, warmth was spreading. Not perfect, not smooth, but real. And sometimes real was all you needed. Moving the children into the main house should have been simple. It wasn't. Clara carried Tommy's small bag up the stairs while Rose and Eli followed with their own belongings. And the whole time she felt Wade's presence behind them like a shadow that didn't know whether to stay or flee. He'd agreed to this, asked for it even. But now that it was happening, she could feel his panic radiating through the floorboards. This one, Wade said gruffly, pushing open the first door on the right. Used to be a guest room. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the front yard and a bed that looked like it hadn't been slept in for years. Dust covered every surface thick enough to write in. It's perfect, Clara said, though it clearly wasn't. There's 2 more across the hall. Bigger. The boy can take one, the girl the other. Eli and Rose exchanged glances but didn't argue. They'd learned when to push and when to accept. Wade stood in the hallway looking like a man who'd just invited strangers into his church and was regretting every decision that led to this moment. His hands kept clenching and unclenching, and Clara recognized the signs. He was already building walls, already retreating into the silence that had protected him for so long. Mr. Holloway, she said quietly. He looked at her. Thank you. Wade nodded once, turned, and practically fled down the stairs. Clara listened to his uneven footsteps, that ankle still bothering him despite 2 weeks of rest, and made a mental note to check the wrapping later. Then she turned to her children. All right, let's make these rooms livable. They spent the afternoon cleaning. Rose attacked dust with the fury of a general commanding troops, while Eli hauled water for washing floors, and Tommy did his best to help by moving small items from one place to another with general supervising. By sunset, 3 bedrooms had been transformed from forgotten spaces into rooms that children actually lived in. Clara tucked Tommy into bed that night in a real room with real walls and a real door that closed, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying. Her baby had a bedroom, After months of sleeping in wagons and barns and the corners of other people's charity, he had a space that was his. "Mama?" Tommy's voice was sleepy. "Is this forever?" "I hope so, sweetheart." "Me too. General likes it here." Clara kissed his forehead and left the door cracked open the way he preferred, then checked on Rose and Eli. Both were already asleep, exhausted from the day's work and probably from the emotional weight of finally having something that felt permanent. Downstairs, she found Wade sitting in the parlor staring at a cold fireplace. "You should start a fire," Clara said. "It's getting cold." "Don't need one." "The children might appreciate the warmth." Wade's jaw tightened, but he stood and started building a fire with movements that were more violent than necessary. Clara watched him slam logs into place and crumple newspaper with enough force to tear it, and she understood what was happening. He was terrified. Not of them exactly, of what they represented, of the possibility that he might care about something again and lose it, of the vulnerability that came with letting people matter. The fire caught and spread, filling the room with light that made the shadows dance on the walls. "I'm not her," Clara said quietly. Wade froze, poker in hand. "What?" "Your wife. I'm not her. I'm not going to leave in the middle of the night without warning." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because I've already lost everything once, and I know exactly how much it costs to rebuild. I'm not going to throw that away on impulse." Wade set the poker down and turned to face her. "You don't know me. Don't know what it's like living with me." "Margaret had her reasons for leaving." "I'm sure she did. But I'm not Margaret, and you're not the same man you were 3 years ago." "How would you know?" "Because the man you were wouldn't have let us stay. Wouldn't have asked us to move into the house. Wouldn't have looked at my son like he was worth teaching, or my daughter like she had value, or my youngest like he mattered." Clara moved closer. "You're changing, Mr. Holloway, whether you want to admit it or not." Wade's face was carved from stone. "Change doesn't last." "Maybe not, but maybe we're both tired enough of being alone to try anyway." They stood there in the firelight, two people who'd survived different kinds of abandonment, and Clara saw the exact moment Wade made a choice. Not to trust her completely, that would take time, but to stop running from the possibility. "There's rules," he said finally. "All right. My room is off limits. End of the hall, door stays closed. Nobody goes in there." "Agreed. The ranch work comes first. Always. If something needs doing, it gets done before anything else." "Of course. And the kids?" Wade struggled with this one. "They need to understand this isn't a game. Ranch life is hard, dangerous. They step wrong, they could get hurt or killed. No second chances out here." "I'll make sure they understand." Wade nodded. "Breakfast is at dawn, dinner at sunset. I don't eat lunch." "You should." "I don't." Clara let it go. "Pick your battles," her mother used to say. This wasn't one worth fighting yet. "Anything else?" she asked. Wade looked at her for a long moment. "Don't make me regret this. I could say the same to you." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "Fair enough." He left her standing by the fire, and Clara heard his uneven footsteps climb the stairs to that off-limits room at the end of the hall. A door closed. A lock clicked. Clara sat down in the chair he'd vacated and stared into the flames. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. Wade Holloway wasn't just damaged. He was actively fighting against healing, like a wound that kept tearing itself open rather than scarring over. But Clara had 3 children depending on her, winter coming fast, and nowhere else to go. She'd make this work. She had to. The first snow came 2 weeks later, early November, dumping 6 inches overnight and turning the ranch into a white wasteland that looked beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Clara woke to find Wade already gone, out checking on cattle that were too stupid to seek shelter. She dressed quickly, stoked the fire, and started breakfast while watching the storm through the kitchen window. Eli appeared first, drawn by the smell of coffee and bacon. "It's really coming down," he said, pressing his face to the glass. "Welcome to Colorado winter. This is just the warning shot." "Mr. Holloway's been gone a while," Clara had noticed. "He knows what he's doing." "Does he?" Eli turned to look at her. "Because from what I've seen, he's been letting things fall apart for years. What if he doesn't know how to stop?" "Too smart, her boy. too observant for his own good. Then we'll help him figure it out, Clara said. An hour passed, then 2. The snow kept falling and Wade didn't return. Rose came down with Tommy, both wrapped in blankets and looking concerned. "Where's Mr. Holloway?" Rose asked. "Checking the herd." "In this? Cattle don't stop needing care just because the weather turns bad." But Clara was starting to worry. That ankle wasn't fully healed. If Wade had pushed too hard, if he'd fallen somewhere in the snow, if the cold had gotten to him. She was pulling on her coat when the door burst open. Wade stumbled in, covered in snow and ice, his face red from cold and exertion. Behind him, struggling through the door, was a calf that couldn't have been more than a few days old. "Found her separated from her mother," Wade grunted, half carrying the shivering animal. "Won't survive out there." Clara grabbed blankets while Eli ran to build up the fire. Together they rubbed down the calf, getting her warm and dry while Wade collapsed into a chair and tried to catch his breath. "You're freezing," Clara said, noticing his hands were white and stiff. "I'm fine." "You're not fine, Rose. Get hot water. Tommy, more blankets. Eli, help me with his coat." Wade tried to protest, but Clara ignored him, peeling off layers of frozen clothing with efficiency born from years of tending to miners who'd come home half dead from the cold. His fingers were borderline frostbitten. His ankle was swollen again from too much walking, and he was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. "Stubborn fool," Clara muttered, wrapping his hands in warm cloths. "You could have frozen to death out there." Calf needed help. "And you needed to ask for help bringing her in. That's what Eli and I are here for." Wade looked at the calf, now wrapped in blankets by the fire with Tommy sitting guard. "Couldn't leave her." Clara understood. Saving that calf wasn't about the animal. It was about Wade proving to himself that he could still care about something enough to fight for it. That he wasn't completely dead inside. "Next time," she said firmly, "you take Eli with you. Or you wait until the storm passes. Or you tell me your plan so I know when to worry. Understood?" Wade met her eyes. "You sound like—" He cut himself off, but Clara knew what he'd been about to say. "You sound like a wife." "I sound like someone who needs you alive," Clara corrected. "Because if you die, we're back on the road with nowhere to go and winter already here. So you staying alive isn't just about you anymore. It's about all of us." Wade looked at his hands wrapped in her careful bandaging, at the children working together to save the calf, at the kitchen that smelled like breakfast and warmth and home. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess it is." The calf survived. They named her Scout because Tommy insisted she'd been scouting ahead for her mama and just gotten lost. Wade rolled his eyes at the sentimentality, but didn't argue, and Clara noticed he checked on Scout 3 times that first day. The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of being trapped inside together, of learning to navigate shared spaces and shared meals and the awkward intimacy of proximity. Wade retreated to his room when things got too loud or too much, but he always came back for dinner. Always sat at the table while Clara served food and the children talked about their day. Eli asked questions about ranching that Wade answered with increasing patience. Rose organized the ranch books and found 3 years of mistakes that made Wade wince but also saved him money once corrected. Tommy followed Wade around whenever allowed, clutching general and offering observations that were equal parts profound and nonsensical. "Why do cows eat grass?" Tommy asked one afternoon. "Because that's what they eat," Wade said. "But why not bread? Bread is better. Cows can't digest bread." "Did anyone ask them?" Wade looked at Clara like he was drowning. She just smiled and went back to her sewing. On the 6th day, the storm broke and the world outside was buried under 2 feet of snow. Wade and Eli spent hours digging paths to the barn, checking on cattle, breaking ice on water troughs. Clara and Rose inventoried food supplies and realized they were lower than comfortable. "I'll go to town tomorrow," Wade said at dinner. "In this snow?" Clara shook her head. "The pass will be dangerous. Can't wait until spring. We need supplies." "Then I'm coming with you. We'll need extra hands to carry everything back." Wade started to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Fine, but Eli stays here with his sisters. Something happens to us, they'll need someone who knows how to keep things running." The casual way he said "us" made Clara's heart do something complicated, like they were a unit, a team, a family. The trip to town took twice as long as it should have. The wagon struggled through snowdrifts, the horses fought every step, and by the time they reached Black Ridge, both Clara and Wade were exhausted. Mackey's general store was crowded with ranchers and townspeople all stocking up after the storm. Conversation stopped when Clara walked in beside Wade. "Well now," Mackey said with poorly hidden surprise. "Heard you had a new cook, Wade. Didn't realize she came to town with you." "Mrs. Bennett handles the household accounts," Wade said flatly. "Makes sense she'd oversee supply purchases." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Clara could feel the stares, hear the whispers starting already. "That's the cook, the one with all those kids. I heard they're living in the house now. Wonder what else is going on." Clara lifted her chin and started making a list of what they needed. Flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, cornmeal. Things that would last through winter and keep a household of 5 fed. "Quite a list," Mackey observed. "Quite a household," Clara replied smoothly. She was counting coins when a woman approached, middle-aged, dressed well enough to indicate money, with a face that suggested she'd appointed herself guardian of public morality. "You're the Bennett woman," she said. Not a question. "I am." "Convenient, isn't it? Widow shows up with children and suddenly has a position in a lonely man's household." Clara felt Wade go rigid beside her, felt him start to turn, start to say something that would probably involve cursing and definitely involve making this worse. She put her hand on his arm. Light. Just enough pressure to say, "I've got this." "What's your name?" Clara asked the woman. "Mrs. Patricia Crowley." "Well, Mrs. Crowley, you're absolutely right. It is convenient. Convenient that Mr. Holloway needed help and I needed work. Convenient that my children and I had nowhere else to go and he had space to offer. Convenient that sometimes when people need each other, they find a way to help rather than judge." Clara smiled without warmth. "I assume you've never been desperate enough to accept help from strangers. How fortunate for you." Mrs. Crowley's face went red. "I was merely observing—" "You were implying impropriety where none exists. Mr. Holloway hired me to cook and manage his household. I'm doing exactly that. If you have concerns about my character, I suggest you direct them to Reverend Williams, who can verify that I attend services every Sunday with my children and have given him no cause for complaint." This was a complete bluff. Clara hadn't been to church since arriving, but she was betting Mrs. Crowley wouldn't check. The gamble paid off. Mrs. Crowley huffed, made some comment about standards and propriety, and swept out of the store with her reputation as town gossip intact. Wade waited until she was gone before speaking. "You didn't have to defend yourself to her." "Yes, I did. Because if I don't, the rumors spread and eventually they reach your business partners and your neighbors, and suddenly you're the rancher who has a scandalous household and nobody wants to deal with you. I don't care what people think." "Maybe you should." Clara went back to counting coins. "Reputation matters on the frontier, especially for someone trying to rebuild." Wade was quiet for a moment. Then, "That thing about church. You really go every Sunday?" "Starting this Sunday, yes." "I don't go to church. I'm not asking you to. But my children will be raised with some sense of community and morality, and that means church whether you approve or not." Wade looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're not afraid of me at all, are you?" "Should I be?" "Most people are, or they pity me. Haven't decided which is worse." Clara met his eyes. "I don't fear you, and I don't pity you. I see you as a man who's been hurt and who's trying to figure out how to live again. That's not frightening. That's human." Something shifted in Wade's expression. Not softness exactly, he was too guarded for that, but maybe the beginning of trust. They finished purchasing supplies and loaded the wagon in silence. The ride home was long and cold, and Clara found herself watching Wade from the corner of her eye. His hands on the reins were steady despite the frostbite damage. His jaw was set in that familiar hard line, but there was something different in the way he held himself. Like he wasn't quite so alone anymore. "Mrs. Crowley was wrong," Wade said suddenly. Clara looked at him. About it being convenient. You showing up." He kept his eyes on the road. "It was more than that." "What was it then?" Wade was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Necessary. Like finding water in a drought. Didn't know I needed it until it was there." Clara's throat went tight. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Wasn't trying to be nice, just honest. They didn't speak again until they reached the ranch, but something had changed between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. The children ran out to help unload, chattering about Scout's progress, and how Eli had fixed a broken stall door, and how Rose had made stew that was almost as good as Clara's. Wade listened to all of it without complaint, even smiled once when Tommy showed him a drawing of General leading an army of horses. That night, after the children were in bed and the kitchen was clean, Clara sat by the fire with her mending. Wade came down from his room, a rare occurrence, and sat in the chair across from her. "Question," he said. Clara looked up. "Yes?" "Your husband, Thomas. What was he like?" The question surprised her. Wade had never asked about her past, never shown interest in anything beyond the present moment. "He was kind," Clara said slowly. "Patient. He loved the children more than anything, worked himself to death in those mines trying to give us a better life." She paused. "But he wasn't perfect. He gambled sometimes, drank more than he should, made promises he couldn't keep. But you loved him." "Yes. Despite everything, yes." Wade nodded slowly. "Margaret, my wife, she wasn't wrong to leave. I gave her nothing, no conversation, no affection, no reason to stay, just expected her to be satisfied with a roof and meals and silence." He stared into the fire. "Took me a long time to admit that I drove her away by being exactly what my father taught me to be." "What did your father teach you?" "That feelings are weakness, that men don't talk, they work, that showing emotion is the same as showing your throat to wolves." Wade's hands clenched. He broke my mother's spirit with that philosophy, watched her shrink into nothing over 30 years of marriage, and then I turned around and did the same thing to Margaret. Clara set down her mending. "You're not doing it to me." "Not yet. But what if I can't change? What if this," he gestured around the room, "is temporary and eventually I go back to being the man I was? Then I'll kick you in the shins and make you snap out of it." Wade blinked. Then, incredibly, he laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that was rusty and surprised but genuine. "You would, wouldn't you?" Without hesitation. "I've dealt with stubborn animals before. You're not that different." Wade shook his head, still almost smiling. "You're something else, Mrs. Bennett. Clara, if we're living in the same house and raising my children together and having conversations about dead spouses, you can call me Clara." "Clara," Wade repeated, testing the name. "All right, Clara. And I'll keep calling you Mr. Holloway until you tell me otherwise." "Wade, it's Wade." Clara smiled. "Wade." They sat in comfortable silence while the fire burned down and the Colorado night pressed cold against the windows. Outside, snow covered everything in white that looked peaceful from inside but was deadly to anyone caught in it. But inside, warmth continued spreading through the Holloway house. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And neither of them was alone anymore. December brought harder cold and bigger storms. The cattle huddled together for warmth, while Wade and Eli made daily checks to ensure none were trapped or dying. Clara kept the house running with mechanical efficiency, but even she could feel the strain of winter tightening around them. Food supplies ran lower. The cold made everything harder, washing clothes, heating water, keeping rooms warm. Rose caught a fever that scared everyone until it broke 3 days later. Tommy developed a cough that lingered for weeks. Wade was quieter during this time, more withdrawn. Clara caught him staring at nothing sometimes, his face carved in hard lines that suggested he was fighting battles nobody else could see. "You all right?" she asked one evening. "Fine." "You're not fine. You're somewhere else entirely." Wade's jaw worked. "Just thinking about last winter, about being alone in this house while snow buried everything, about how many times I thought about walking out into a storm and not coming back." Clara's heart clenched. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't. Too stubborn to die, too broken to live, just existing." "And now?" Wade looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing past her face to something deeper. "Now I have reasons to stay. That's different, and it scares the hell out of me." "Because reasons can leave." "Yeah." Clara moved closer. "Wade, I can't promise you forever. Nobody can. But I can promise you today, and tomorrow, and every day after that until I can't anymore. And right now, that's all either of us has." Wade reached out and touched her hand. Just for a moment. just long enough for Clara to feel the calluses and scars and warmth of him. Then he pulled back. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess it is." Christmas came and went without ceremony. Wade didn't celebrate it, hadn't in years, but Clara made a small meal and Rose fashioned decorations from scraps. Tommy got a new wooden horse that Wade had carved in secret, and the boy's joy was worth every uncomfortable moment of Wade trying to pretend he didn't care. As winter deepened and the ranch settled into frozen silence, Clara realized something that should have terrified her but didn't. She was falling in love with Wade Holloway. Not the desperate, needy love of someone looking for rescue, not the practical, transactional love of convenience. Real love. The kind that saw someone's broken pieces and wanted to help fit them back together. The kind that grew in quiet moments and shared struggles and the intimacy of building something together. She didn't tell him. Wasn't time yet. Might never be time. But she felt it growing like spring beneath winter snow, waiting for the right moment to break through. And for now, that was enough. Spring came late to Colorado that year, waiting until mid-March to finally break winter's grip on the valley. The snow melted in reluctant patches, revealing brown grass and mud and all the damage that months of freezing had inflicted on fence lines and buildings. Wade surveyed the ranch with the expression of a man counting casualties after a battle. The north pasture fence was completely down in 3 places. 2 sections of the barn roof had collapsed under snow weight. Several cattle had been lost to cold or wolves despite their best efforts, but they'd survived. All of them. That counted for something. "Could be worse," Eli said, standing beside Wade on the ridge overlooking the property. Wade glanced at the boy. Eli had grown over winter, not just taller, but stronger, more capable. His hands were developing calluses in the same places Wade's had at that age. His eyes had that steady, serious look of someone who'd learned that work didn't wait for fair weather or good moods. "Could be better," Wade countered. "Could always be better. That's why there's tomorrow." Wade almost smiled. The kid was starting to sound like Clara, all practical optimism and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It was annoying. It was also exactly what this ranch needed. "All right," Wade said. "Here's the plan. We tackle the fences first, get the pastures secured before we move the herd to better grazing. Then the barn roof before the spring rains, turn it into a swimming pool. After that, we need to talk about expanding," Eli interrupted. Wade raised an eyebrow. "Expanding?" "Yes, sir. I've been going through the books with Rose. We lost 20 head over winter, but we also had 15 calves born. That's a net loss of only 5. If we can acquire another 30 or 40 head before fall, we could increase the herd size enough to make a real profit next year." "Acquire with what money?" "The money Rose found that you'd been miscalculating in your taxes for 3 years. Turns out the territorial office owes you about $200. Wade stared at him. "200. "Yes, sir. Rose wrote a letter to the tax assessor. Should hear back in a few weeks." Wade looked down at the ranch, then back at Eli. "You and your sister have been planning this." "We've been thinking about the future. Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" The question hit harder than intended. Wade had spent 3 years deliberately not thinking about the future, just grinding through each day until he could collapse into bed and do it again tomorrow. The idea that these kids were planning years ahead, seeing potential where he only saw failure, was uncomfortable. It was also humbling. "All right," Wade said. "If the money comes through, we'll talk about expansion. But that means more work, longer days, harder labor. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I know you're not. That's what worries me." Eli frowned. "Sir?" Wade chose his words carefully. "You're 9 years old, Eli. You should be playing and learning to read better and being a kid. Instead, you're out here working a ranch like a grown man. It's not right. You need the help." "I do, but that doesn't mean I like needing it from a 9-year-old. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My pa died in a mine because he was trying to give us a better life. He worked himself to death doing it. I figure working a ranch is better than working underground. And at least here I get to see the sun and eat mama's cooking and sleep in a real bed." He looked at Wade. "I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a whole lot better than what we had." Wade felt something twist in his chest. The boy was right, of course, but that didn't make Wade feel any less guilty about it. "Just promise me something," Wade said. "What?" "When you get the chance to be a kid, you take it. Don't grow up faster than you have to just because the world demands it." Eli considered this. I'll try, but I'm not making any promises. They walked back to the house together, and Wade found himself thinking about the strange family he'd accidentally acquired. A widow who could outwork most men. A 9-year-old with the business sense of someone twice his age. A 7-year-old who organized chaos into order with the efficiency of a military general. And a 4-year-old who saw the world through eyes that still believed in goodness and wooden horses and happy endings. They were changing him. Slowly, painfully, like bones healing wrong and having to be rebroken to set properly. But they were changing him. The question was whether he could change enough. Clara was in the garden when Rose came running with a letter. "Mama, Mama, it came!" Clara straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. She'd spent the morning planting vegetables in soil that was finally thawed enough to work. Her back ached and her knees were muddy, and she'd never been happier to be dirty. What came? The letter from the tax office. Rose was practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Mackey brought it from town. Should I open it? Can I open it?" "Where's Mr. Holloway?" "Out with Eli checking fences." Clara hesitated. This was Wade's business, Wade's money. She had no right to open his correspondence, even if Rose had written the letter that prompted it. Then again, Rose was standing there with hope written all over her face, and Clara couldn't bring herself to make the girl wait. "All right, open it." Rose tore into the envelope with the barely controlled violence of a child trying very hard to be careful. She pulled out the letter, unfolded it, and her eyes went wide. "Well?" Clara prompted. $243, Rose whispered. "They're sending a bank draft for $243. Clara sat down right there in the dirt. $243. That was more than most families saw in a year. That was the difference between survival and actually thriving. "You did this," Clara said. "You found that mistake and you fixed it." Rose's face flushed with pride. "I just did the math right. Mr. Holloway had been calculating the grazing tax wrong for years. He was paying too much." "Have you told him?" "Not yet. Wanted to wait until we knew for sure." Clara pulled her daughter into a hug, not caring about the dirt or the mud or anything except the fierce pride burning in her chest. "You brilliant, brilliant girl." They were still sitting there when Wade and Eli returned. Wade took one look at them, at the letter in Rose's hand, and stopped. "What happened?" His voice was tight with concern. Rose jumped up and thrust the letter at him. "The tax office responded, 'We were right. You've been overpaying for 3 years and they're refunding the difference.'" Wade read the letter slowly, his face expressionless. Then he read it again. Then he looked at Rose. $243. "Yes, sir." "Because I was calculating the grazing tax wrong." "Yes, sir. You were using the old rate from before the territorial adjustment in 71. The new rate is actually lower, but nobody told you about the change, so you just kept paying the higher amount." Wade folded the letter carefully. "Rose." "Yes, sir." "You just saved this ranch." Rose's eyes went wide. "I did?" "That money means we can buy more cattle. Means we can hire temporary help for the big jobs. Means we can actually plan for a future instead of just scrambling to survive." Wade crouched down to her level. "You did good work. Real good work." Rose threw her arms around his neck. Wade froze. Clara watched him go completely still, arms at his sides, every muscle locked like he'd been turned to stone. Rose didn't seem to notice, just kept hugging him with the unselfconscious affection of a 7-year-old who'd done something wonderful and wanted to share her joy. Slowly, carefully, Wade's arms came up and wrapped around Rose. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. When Rose finally let go and ran off to tell Tommy the good news, Wade stood there looking stunned. "You all right?" Clara asked gently. "She hugged me." "Yes." I don't." Wade struggled for words. "Nobody's hugged me in 3 years." Clara's heart broke a little. "Get used to it. That's what children do when they love someone." Wade looked at her sharply. "She doesn't." "She does. They all do. You're not just the man who gave us shelter anymore, Wade. You're family." "I don't know how to be family." "Neither do I, really. My family disowned us, remember? But we're figuring it out together." Clara stood and brushed dirt from her skirt. "That's what family is. People who choose each other and then figure out how to make it work." Wade was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want to do something." "What?" "Something for the kids, something to celebrate. They've worked hard all winter and they deserve—" He trailed off, searching. "I don't know, something good." Clara smiled. "There's a spring festival in town next week. Music, dancing, games. We could take them." "I don't dance." "You don't have to dance. You just have to show up and let them have fun." Wade looked like she'd suggested he walk through fire, but after a moment he nodded. "All right, the festival. We'll go." Clara wanted to kiss him. The impulse came out of nowhere and hit with the force of a physical blow. She wanted to grab his rough, scarred face and kiss him until he understood that he was becoming the man he'd been too afraid to be. Instead, she just smiled and said, "The children will be thrilled." The week before the festival was chaos. Rose insisted everyone needed proper clothes, which meant Clara spent hours mending and altering the few decent things they owned. Eli needed new boots because he'd outgrown his over winter. Tommy needed constant reassurance that General could come to the festival too, and Wade needed convincing that this was actually happening. "I don't do festivals," he said for the third time. "You're doing this one," Clara replied, not looking up from the shirt she was mending. "People will talk." "People already talk. Might as well give them something worth talking about." "I don't know how to—" Wade gestured vaguely. "Be normal. Around people." Clara set down her sewing and looked at him. Really looked. He was genuinely nervous, she realized. This man who could face down cattle and storms and brutal frontier life without flinching was scared of a town festival. "Wade," she said gently, "you don't have to perform. You don't have to be charming or social or anything except yourself. Just stand there and let the children enjoy themselves. That's all I'm asking." "What if someone says something about us, about the arrangement?" "Then I'll handle it the same way I handled Mrs. Crowley." Clara went back to her sewing. "You're not responsible for other people's small minds, just your own actions." Wade grunted, which Clara had learned meant he accepted her logic but didn't like it. The day of the festival arrived with perfect spring weather, warm sun, clear skies, and a breeze that carried the smell of new grass and possibilities. They loaded into the wagon wearing their best clothes, which weren't much but were clean and mended and good enough. Tommy sat between Clara and Wade on the bench, clutching General and vibrating with excitement. Rose and Eli sat in the back, Rose reading aloud from a book, while Eli pretended not to be just as excited as his younger siblings. The ride to town took an hour. Wade was silent the entire time, his jaw set in that familiar hard line that meant he was preparing for battle. Clara let him be. Pushing wouldn't help. Black Ridge was transformed for the festival. Banners hung from buildings, tables laden with food lined the main street, and a small platform had been erected for musicians. People crowded everywhere, families, couples, children running wild with the freedom of a warm spring day. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop and sat there, hands tight on the reins. "We don't have to stay long," Clara said quietly. "How long is not long?" "However long you can manage." Wade took a breath, then climbed down and helped Clara descend. The children scrambled out on their own, eyes wide with wonder at all the activity. "Stay together," Clara instructed, "and stay where I can see you." "Yes, Mama," they chorused, then immediately scattered toward the nearest game booth. Clara watched them go with a mixture of pride and anxiety. They deserved this. Deserved normal childhood experiences and joy, and the chance to just be kids for a few hours. "They'll be fine," Wade said, reading her expression. "I know. I just worry. That's what mothers do." Clara looked at him. "What do fathers do?" Wade's face went carefully blank. "Wouldn't know. My father wasn't the worrying type." "What type was he?" "The type that thought love was weakness and kindness was failure." Wade watched the children, his expression unreadable. "The type that made sure I knew I was a disappointment from the day I was born." Clara's heart ached. "Wade, don't. It's old history." But his voice was rough, and Clara knew it wasn't as old as he pretended. They walked through the festival together, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed, but not touching. People stared. Of course they stared. Wade Holloway showing up at a social event was like a ghost appearing at a wedding, unsettling and noteworthy. But Wade kept walking, kept his head up. And when Eli ran over to show him a prize he'd won at the ring toss, Wade examined it with the seriousness of a man evaluating livestock. "Good throw," Wade said. "Want to try? They've got bigger prizes if you land 3 in a row." Wade looked at the ring toss booth, at the crowd gathering to watch, at the impossibility of backing out now without disappointing the boy. "Yeah," he said. "All right." Clara watched Wade step up to the booth, pay his nickel, and take the rings. His first throw was wild, missing everything. The second clipped the edge of a bottle but didn't land. The third was perfect. The crowd murmured. Wade threw again, another perfect landing, one more throw for the big prize. Wade tested the weight of the final ring, aimed and released. It sailed through the air and landed perfectly around the neck of the center bottle. The crowd erupted in applause. Eli whooped. Wade stood there looking stunned, like he'd surprised himself. The booth operator handed over the prize, a beautiful carved wooden box with brass hinges. Wade accepted it, turned to Eli, and held it out. "Here." Eli's eyes went wide. "But you won it." "You convinced me to try. That makes it yours." Eli took the box like it was made of gold. "Thank you, sir." Wade, just Wade. Something passed between them then. Some understanding that went deeper than words. Eli nodded, clutching his prize, and Wade looked less like a man being tortured and more like someone who'd just discovered he could still do something right. The afternoon passed in a blur of music and food, and watching the children soak up joy like plants starved for sunlight. Rose danced with other girls her age, her laughter bright and clear. Tommy rode a pony in circles, General tucked safely in his pocket. Eli won another small prize and immediately gave it to Rose, who hugged him so hard he complained. Clara and Wade found themselves at the edge of the dancing area, watching couples spin and laugh. "You should dance," Wade said suddenly. Clara looked at him. "With who?" "Anyone. You don't need to stand here with me all day. I'm exactly where I want to be." Wade's jaw worked. "Clara, I mean it. I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I choose to be." "Why?" The question was raw, vulnerable in a way Wade rarely allowed himself to be. "Because you matter to me," Clara said simply. "Because somewhere between bread and fences and Scout the calf, you became important, and I don't abandon important things." Wade stared at her. The music swirled around them, people laughing and dancing and living lives that seemed impossibly light compared to the weight they both carried. "I don't know how to do this," Wade said quietly. "Do what?" "Care about people. Be cared about. Margaret tried for 7 years and I failed her every day." "What makes you think—" "Because I'm not Margaret," Clara interrupted. "And you're not the same man you were. We've both been broken, Wade. Both lost things we can't get back. But maybe that's exactly why this works. Because we're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for something real." Wade reached out and took her hand. Right there in the middle of the festival, in front of everyone, he laced his fingers through hers and held on. "I'm terrified of this," he admitted. "Me too." "What if I ruin it? What if you don't?" They stood there holding hands while the world spun around them, and Clara felt something settle into place, some piece of her heart that had been dislocated since Thomas died, since her family turned their backs, since she'd loaded her children into a wagon and set out with nothing except hope. She was falling in love with Wade Holloway. No, that wasn't quite right. She'd already fallen. The ride home was quiet. Tommy fell asleep against Clara's shoulder, exhausted from excitement. Rose and Eli talked softly in the back about the festival, about the games, about next year already. Next year, like they'd definitely be here. Like this was permanent. Wade didn't let go of Clara's hand the entire ride. When they reached the ranch, Wade carried Tommy inside while Eli and Rose stumbled to their rooms still chattering. Clara followed more slowly, her heart full and her mind racing. Wade came back downstairs and found her in the kitchen. "Clara." She turned. "Today was good," Wade said. "Better than good. I forgot what it was like to be part of something instead of just watching from outside." "The children were happy." "You were happy too. I saw you," Clara smiled. "Yes, I was." Wade crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, cupped her face in his rough, scarred hands, and kissed her. It wasn't smooth, wasn't practiced. His hands shook and he pulled back too soon, eyes wide with something between fear and wonder. "Sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have—" Clara grabbed his shirt and pulled him back, kissing him properly this time, letting him know that this was wanted, needed, right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not good at this," he whispered. "Neither am I. We'll figure it out. I don't want to hurt you." "Then don't. It's that simple." "Nothing's that simple." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Wade Holloway, I've survived mining camps, abandonment, frontier winters, and raising 3 children alone. I'm not fragile. I'm not going to break because you're learning how to feel again. And I'm not going to leave because it's hard." Wade searched her face like he was looking for the lie, the catch, the moment she'd reveal this was all some elaborate trick. He didn't find it, because it wasn't there. "I care about you," he said finally, "more than I thought I could care about anyone again." "I know." "How?" "Because you carved Tommy a horse, because you taught Eli to mend fences, because you let Rose hug you, because you took my hand at the festival even though it terrified you." Clara touched his face gently. "Because you're trying. That's all I need." Wade kissed her again, softer this time, and Clara felt years of loneliness and fear start to crack apart. They stood in the kitchen that Clara had brought back to life, in the house that was becoming a home, and made a silent promise to each other. This was real. This was worth fighting for. This was theirs. Upstairs, 3 children slept peacefully, dreaming of festivals and prizes and the safe, warm house they'd finally found. And downstairs, 2 broken people held each other and believed, maybe for the first time, that broken things could be mended, that spring could follow winter, that love could grow in the hardest soil if you were stubborn enough to keep planting. Outside, the Colorado night settled over the ranch like a blanket. The cattle were safe. The fences were being mended. Scout was thriving in her stall. And inside the Holloway house, warmth continued spreading. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. And sometimes real was everything. The morning after the festival, Clara woke to find Wade's side of the bed empty. Not his bed, hers. Because somewhere in the night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they'd stopped pretending that walls and propriety mattered more than the truth between them. Clara dressed quickly and found Wade on the porch, coffee in hand, staring at the sunrise like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "You left," she said. "Wade didn't turn. Didn't want the kids to find me there, not yet. They're going to figure it out eventually." "I know. But there's a difference between knowing and seeing. Wanted to give them time to adjust to the idea before shoving it in their faces." Clara moved beside him. "You're overthinking this." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm thinking about it exactly the right amount." Wade finally looked at her. "This changes everything, Clara. You understand that? Once we tell people, tell the kids, there's no going back. This becomes real in a way that affects all of us. It's already real." "You know what I mean." Clara did. She'd been thinking about it all night, actually, about how the town would react, about whether the children would accept Wade not just as their employer but as something more, about whether she was making the right choice or just the desperate one. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked. Wade took a long drink of coffee. "Every single one, but that doesn't mean I want to stop." "Then we move forward, carefully, honestly, and we deal with whatever comes. Just like that." "Just like that." Wade shook his head. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. We care about each other. We want to build a life together. Everything else is just details." Clara touched his arm. "Unless you don't want—" Wade kissed her. Right there on the porch in the early morning light, where anyone could see. When he pulled back, his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them in months. "I want," he said simply. "That's the problem. I want so much it scares me." "Good. Fear means you're alive. Or means I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Could be both." Wade almost smiled. "Yeah, could be." They stood there until they heard footsteps inside, the children waking up. Then Wade stepped back, creating proper distance, and they went inside to start breakfast like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. The bank draft from the territorial tax office arrived 3 days later. $243 in official funds that turned the Holloway Ranch from barely surviving to actually viable. Wade stood in the kitchen staring at it like it might disappear. "It's real," Clara said. "Rose checked the signatures twice. It's legitimate. We could buy 40 head of cattle with this, maybe 50 if I negotiate hard. Or you could repair the barn properly, or save some for winter supplies, or I'm buying cattle." Clara knew that tone, knew when Wade had made a decision and arguing would just waste breath. "All right," she said, "but you're taking Eli with you to select them. He's got a good eye for livestock." Wade looked surprised. "You trust his judgment that much? Don't you?" Wade considered this. "Yeah, I do." "Then it's settled. You and Eli take the draft to town, talk to the cattle dealers, and bring home the foundation of a real herd." Clara went back to kneading bread dough. "And while you're there, you might want to stop by the jeweler." Wade froze. The jeweler. "If you're going to ask me to marry you, Wade Holloway, you're doing it properly. With a ring." The silence stretched so long, Clara thought she'd miscalculated badly. Then Wade said, very quietly, "I haven't asked you yet." "You will." "That confident?" Clara looked at him over her shoulder. "Yes." Wade stared at her, then started laughing. Actually laughing, the sound rusty but genuine. "You're something else, Clara Bennett. Soon to be Clara Holloway, if you get your act together." "Is that a proposal?" "That's a fact. The proposal is your job." Wade crossed the kitchen and pulled her close, not caring about the flour on her hands or the bread dough she was abandoning. "What if I mess it up? Then I'll say yes anyway and we'll laugh about it later." "You make it sound easy." "It is easy. The hard part is everything after. But we're already doing that part, so we might as well make it official." Wade kissed her forehead. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." 2 days later, Wade and Eli left for town with the bank draft and a plan. Clara watched them go with a mixture of pride and anxiety. This was the first time Wade had trusted Eli with something this important, and she could see how much it mattered to both of them. Rose found her standing by the window. "They'll be fine, Mama." "I know." "Then why do you look worried?" Clara turned to her daughter. "Because caring about people means worrying about them. It's part of the deal." Rose considered this with her usual seriousness. "Do you love Mr. Holloway?" The question was direct, unexpected, very Rose. Clara could have deflected, could have given a vague answer that protected everyone's feelings. Instead, she said, "Yes, I do." "Good. He loves you too." "How do you know?" "Because he looks at you the way Papa used to look at you, like you're the best thing he's ever seen." Rose paused. "Are you going to marry him?" "If he asks." "He will. Eli says he's been acting weird for days. That means he's planning something." Clara smiled. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just notice more now." Rose moved closer. "Mama, if you marry Mr. Holloway, does that make him our father?" The question hit harder than Clara expected. "Would you want that?" "Papa was Papa. Nobody can replace him, but—" Rose struggled with the words. "Mr. Holloway is good to us. He teaches Eli things. He fixed my bookkeeping errors without making me feel stupid. He carved Tommy a horse. That's what fathers do, isn't it?" "Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly what fathers do." "Then I think it would be okay. If he wanted to be our father, not instead of Papa, but in addition to." Clara pulled Rose into a hug. "You are the wisest 7-year-old I've ever met." "I'm almost 8. The wisest almost 8-year-old then." They stood there until Tommy came running in, demanding to know when Eli would be back, and the moment passed into the ordinary chaos of daily life. But Clara carried Rose's words with her all day. In addition to, not instead of. That was the key, wasn't it? You didn't replace what you'd lost. You built something new alongside it. You honored the past while reaching for the future. That's what she and Wade were doing. Not erasing their previous lives, but creating something that could exist beside them. Wade and Eli returned at sunset with news that made Clara's heart soar. 52 head, Wade announced, dusty and tired, but with something like excitement in his voice. "Good stock, healthy, most of them young enough to breed for years. Dealer gave me a fair price because he knew my father years back." They'll be delivered next week. 52, Clara repeated. Wade, that's enough to make this ranch profitable, enough to build a real future. Wade glanced at Eli. The kid did good. Spotted 3 animals with subtle defects I almost missed. Saved us from bad investments. Eli was trying not to grin and failing completely. And did you make any other stops in town? Clara asked carefully. Wade's hand went to his pocket. Maybe. Definitely. Rose and Tommy were watching with wide eyes, sensing something important was happening but not sure what. Wade took a breath, then got down on one knee right there in the kitchen. Clara Bennett, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I'm going to try anyway, because you deserve better than silence. Clara's eyes filled with tears. When you showed up here with 3 kids and a broken wagon, I thought you were going to ruin my life. Turned out you saved it instead. You brought light to a house that had been dark for years. You made me remember what it's like to care about something, to want to be better, to believe that broken things can be fixed if you're willing to do the work. Wade pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small stone. It's not much, he said, but it's real, like us, like what we're building here. He looked up at her. Marry me. Make this official. Let me be a husband to you and a father to your children. Let me prove that I can be the man you already believe I am. Clara was crying openly now. Yes. Yes? Yes, you stubborn fool. Of course, yes. Wade stood and slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands. Then he kissed her while the children erupted in excitement around them. Does this mean Mr. Holloway is our papa now? Tommy asked. Wade froze, looked at Clara, then at the children, then back at Clara. That's up to them, Clara said softly. Wade's not trying to replace your father, but if you want him to be family, really family, he's willing. Eli spoke first. I'd like that. If it's okay with you, sir. Wade's voice was thick. More than okay. Rose nodded seriously. In addition to Papa, not instead of... In addition to, Wade agreed. Tommy just launched himself at Wade's legs and held on. I'm going to tell General. Wade stood there with a 4-year-old attached to his knees and tears running down his face, and Clara thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful. This was what mattered. Not perfection, not smooth transitions or easy answers, just people choosing each other, broken people building something whole. They were married 4 weeks later in the ranch yard under open sky. The preacher from Black Ridge performed the ceremony while half the town watched. Clara wore a new dress that Rose had helped her sew. Wade wore his best shirt and looked terrified the entire time. Eli stood beside Wade as his best man, serious and proud. Rose held Clara's bouquet of wildflowers. Tommy clutched both General and the new horse Wade had carved for the occasion, declaring them witnesses. Do you, Wade Holloway, take Clara Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife? Wade looked at Clara. I do. And do you, Clara Bennett, take Wade Holloway to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara smiled through tears. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Colorado Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss. Wade didn't wait for permission. He kissed Clara like she was air and he'd been drowning, and the crowd erupted in applause. When they finally broke apart, Tommy shouted, General says yes! And even Wade laughed. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Food, music, dancing. Neighbors who'd once whispered about the arrangement now celebrating the marriage. Mrs. Crowley even grudgingly admitted it was a nice ceremony, which from her was practically a blessing. As the sun set and people started heading home, Clara found herself standing with Wade overlooking their ranch. The cattle they'd purchased grazed peacefully in the north pasture. The barn roof was repaired. The fences were strong. Everything they'd built together spread out before them like proof that impossible things could happen if you were stubborn enough. You know what the funny part is? Wade said. What? I put up that notice looking for a cook, someone to make meals and clean and stay out of my way. Instead, I got a wife, 3 kids, and a reason to keep breathing. He shook his head. Best mistake I ever made. It wasn't a mistake, it was fate. Don't believe in fate. What do you believe in? Wade pulled her close. Bread, hard work, second chances, and you, always you. Clara leaned into him. Think we'll make it? Long term? Honestly, I don't know. I'll probably mess up 100 times. Push you away when I should pull you close. Forget to say the right things at the right times. Revert to silence when I should speak. Probably. But I'll keep trying, every day. That's all I can promise. That's all I need. They stood there as darkness fell and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing. Their children now, all of them. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth having ever is. Wade did mess up more than 100 times. He closed down when emotions got too big, retreated to silence when words felt dangerous, struggled with the vulnerability that love demanded. But he always came back, always apologized, always tried again. Clara had her own moments of doubt, times when the weight of blending two broken families felt impossible. When the frontier life wore her down, when she wondered if she'd made the right choice. But then she'd smell bread baking and remember Wade's face the first time he'd tasted it. Or she'd see Eli working beside his stepfather with quiet pride. Or Rose organizing the ranch books with the satisfaction of someone who'd found her purpose. Or Tommy racing around with both wooden horses, General and the new one he'd named Colonel. And she'd know. This was right. This was home. The ranch prospered. The herd grew. They hired help during busy seasons and slowly became one of the more successful operations in the valley. Rose's bookkeeping saved them thousands. Eli became the best cattleman in 3 counties. Tommy developed a gift for training horses that bordered on supernatural. And Wade learned to laugh, really laugh without the rust or surprise. Learned to show affection without fear. Learned that being vulnerable wasn't the same as being weak. On their 10th anniversary, Clara found Wade on the porch where they'd had so many important conversations. Thinking? She asked. Remembering. That notice I put up. How close I came to taking it down. What stopped you? Stubbornness, mostly. Too proud to admit defeat. Wade pulled her onto his lap. If I'd taken it down one day earlier, you would have driven past, found someone else, built a life somewhere else. But I didn't. No, you didn't. Wade kissed her temple. You know what I think about that? What? I think some things are meant to happen, not fate exactly. Just the universe occasionally getting something right. Clara smiled. Wade Holloway, are you getting philosophical in your old age? I'm 43, not exactly ancient. You're 53. Feels like 43 since you showed up. Smooth talker. Learned from the best. They sat together watching the sun set over the ranch they'd built together, over the life they'd chosen, over the family they'd created from broken pieces and stubborn hope. Inside, 3 children who'd once had nowhere to go were home, safe, loved. And on the trading post wall in Black Ridge, the original notice still hung, faded, torn, barely readable. But everyone remembered it, not because of what it said, because of what answered it. Not a cook, a family. Not a transaction, a transformation, not an ending, a beginning. And sometimes when people felt lost or broken or certain their story was over, they'd look at that notice and remember Wade and Clara. Remember that the hardest hearts could soften, that the deepest silences could be filled, that bread and stubbornness and second chances could build something beautiful. Because Wade had learned something that had taken him 43 years to understand. Being alone wasn't the same as being strong. Silence wasn't protection, and walls built to keep pain out also kept love from getting in. Clara had learned that survival wasn't the same as living, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was trust someone else with your broken pieces. Together, they learned that families weren't just born, they were built. Day by day, choice by choice, meal by meal, through storms and sunshine and all the messy, imperfect, beautiful moments in between. The Holloway Ranch stood strong for generations. The cattle prospered. The land endured. But more important than any of that was what happened inside the house, where children learned that love could exist after loss, where a broken man discovered he could heal, where a desperate woman found she could thrive, where every morning brought fresh bread and second chances, where silence gave way to laughter, where loneliness surrendered to belonging, where a notice asking for a cook created a legacy of choosing each other every single day, no matter how hard it got, because that's what family does. Not the perfect ones from stories, the real ones, the ones built from courage and bread and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. Those families last. Those families matter. Those families change everything. And it all started with a man too broken to hope and a woman too stubborn to quit, meeting on a dying ranch in the middle of nowhere, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, that redemption is possible, that love is patient, that bread really can change everything, and that when you open your gate to someone desperate enough to knock, you might just save yourself in the process.